Have you ever wondered what would happen if Luffy unlocked Joy Boy's Haki in Episode 1? And to be clear, we are not handing a 7-year-old Gear 5th. We are giving him the 2 gifts Joy Boy actually carried, which are Supreme King Haki old enough to shake the sea and the voice of all things that lets him hear what nobody else can. There is one catch because Luffy has no control over any of it, and the power only wakes when someone's freedom is being crushed right in front of him. To everything trapped in a cage, this kid sounds like Dawn, and to everyone holding the keys, he sounds like war drums. Let's find out what that does to the East Blue. So the story begins the same way with one strange difference nobody can explain. Luffy is a loud little menace in Fuchsia Village who eats the gum-gum fruit by accident and begs Shanks to take him to sea every single day. Higuma pours a drink over Shanks, and Luffy screams at the crew for laughing it off. Every glass on the shelf rattles at once, and hardened killers glance at the door without knowing why. Days later, the bandits throw Luffy into the sea, and the Lord of the Coast rises, and this is where the timeline breaks. In canon, this is the moment Shanks loses his arm. In this version, Luffy panics underwater, and something ancient answers as his heartbeat shifts into a rhythm that sounds like drums, and a black shockwave rips across the water. The Sea King freezes mid-bite with its eyes blown wide because its prey just reminded it what actually sits at the top of the food chain. Shanks pulls Luffy out with both arms still attached while the kid sobs about something impossible. He keeps saying that he heard it and that the monster's hunger and its fear reached him like words inside his head. And Shanks goes pale because he spent years sailing under the only man alive who could hear the world like that. This kid does not just leak Conqueror's Haki because he hears things the way Goldie Roger did. The farewell still happens, but everything underneath it changes. Shanks places the straw hat on Luffy's head and makes the same promise about returning it one day. Beckman waits until the village shrinks behind them and asks the question everyone on deck is thinking. You felt that too, didn't you? Shanks watches the shoreline and just says yeah. Now think about the ripple this creates, because Shanks keeping both arms rewrites more history than you would expect. In canon, Mihawk stopped dueling Shanks after the arm was gone because a one-armed rival was no longer worth his blade. In this timeline, the 2 strongest swords in the world are still active rivals, and their duels keep splitting islands for the next decade. Meanwhile, Garp comes to visit and feels the pressure rolling off his grandson within a single day. And Garp does not laugh it off because Garp stood on God Valley 38 years ago, and he knows exactly what the air feels like when something inhuman wakes up inside a person. So he goes very quiet and then doubles his efforts to drag Luffy toward the Marines because he knows better than anyone what the world government does to powers it cannot put on a leash. 10 years later, Luffy sets sail and the East Blue learns the rule of this power within a week. On Alvida's ship, she swings her club and Luffy takes the hit like usual because rubber. But when she turns that club toward Kobe for daring to say his dream out loud, half her crew drops where they stand before Luffy even moves. And here's the detail that matters most, because Kobe stays on his feet completely untouched. This Haki does not crush everyone in range because it crushes the people building cages and parts around the ones fighting to get free. Kobe just declared he wants to join the Marines, and the ancient will inside Luffy treated that dream like something worth protecting. At Shellstown, the same rule fires again when Morgan orders his men to gun down Kobe and a little girl. The order barely leaves his mouth before a wave rolls through the courtyard and every rifle hits the ground. Zoro watches trained Marines collapse because his new captain wanted something hard enough, and he does not know what he just saw, but he knows he picked the right ship. Orangetown is where the past catches up. Buggy hears about people dropping around a rubber kid in a straw hat and goes cold because he has felt this before during his cabin boy years on a ship where the captain's presence could bend a room. The fight starts, and Buggy holds his own right up until he damages the straw hat. The whole town feels the answer as his crew collapses in waves and Richie the Lion flattens itself against the street while Buggy stays conscious through pure survivor's willpower. Because for 1 second, the rookie in front of him feels exactly like his old captain on his worst day. Luffy wins the fight, but Buggy does what Buggy always does. He survives and he remembers, and within a week he sells every detail of what he felt to an information broker for a fat stack of berries. And that is how the first report starts crawling up the chain toward people who should never have heard about this. Syrup Village passes quickly because the voice of all things carries more than the cries of monsters, and it reads human intent just as clearly. Kuro spent 3 years building a cage around Kaya, and he registers like static inside Luffy's head long before any plan is revealed. The moment he starts cutting down his own crew, the pressure ends the fight for him. Then comes the Baratie and 2 discoveries at once. Mihawk still dismantles Zoro because ancient Haki does not close a canyon of pure skill. But when Zoro falls and Luffy's pressure flares hard enough to ripple the sea, Mihawk turns his head for the first time, calls the will radiating off this ship dangerous, and sets sail for the New World that same week because Shanks needs to hear this in person. And then the second discovery lands because the flare has a price. Luffy collapses on the deck, starving and shaking like his body just burned a month of fuel in 10 seconds, and he eats through half the Barati stock while Zeph watches in silence. Sanji still joins for All Blue like always, but he also joins because he watched a body burn itself alive to protect strangers and decided that man should never have to fight hungry again. Then comes Arlong Park and the collision this entire timeline has been building toward, because the sun god Nika is not some forgotten myth in this world. It is a legend that survived among slaves, and it lives strongest among fishmen. When Nami finally breaks down in the dirt and asks for help, Luffy puts the hat on her head and the Haki does something completely new, because instead of exploding, it settles into a slow, steady drumbeat that everyone within a mile can feel inside their chest. Luffy steps through the gate and the laughing stops. The weak fishmen drop instantly while the older ones freeze for a completely different reason, because they grew up on whispered stories about a warrior of liberation whose heartbeats sounded like drums. Hatchin whispers the name Nika out loud, and two of the older fishmen sink to their knees in something that is not fear. And Arlong completely loses his mind because the god his people prayed to in the slave pens is standing in his park wearing a human face, and that single fact offends him more than any punch ever could. The fight still gets brutal because faith does not lower a monster's fists. Arlong tanks the pressure through pure hate and slams Luffy through walls until Luffy sees the map room and 10 years of a caged childhood written in ink. The drums stop being a rhythm and become an eruption that cracks the tower before the kick even lands. When the park collapses, the villagers do not cheer right away because too many of them are still feeling drums in their bones. And that night, Usopp finally asks the question the whole crew has been avoiding because he wants to know if something else is living inside their captain. Loguetown is where the legend goes global and where it gets personal for one Marine. Because Smoker was a child in the crowd the day Roger died, and the memory of that smile never left him. Now Buggy raises a blade over the same platform, and Luffy does the exact thing Roger did 22 years earlier. He smiles and accepts it, except this time the acceptance carries. A burst of Supreme King Haki rolls across the entire square, and pirates drop and bounty hunters drop and Marines fall by the dozen. Smoker's body locks up for half a second, and half a second is all the storm needs because lightning splits the platform and Luffy walks out of the smoke laughing. Smoker stands in the rain staring at the same smile on the same platform from his childhood, and something in him refuses to call it coincidence. Far away in the New World, an island-sized elephant that has walked without rest for 800 years stands completely still because Zunisha heard the drums, and Dragon appears in the storm to save his son just like canon. But when he feels the residue hanging over that square, his mind goes straight back to a burning island 38 years ago. Think about that for a second, because the only two Marines in history who stood on God Valley are this boy's grandfather and this boy's father. The family was standing next to Destiny the whole time. And this story ends at Reverse Mountain in the most fitting way possible. The crew crashes headfirst into a whale the size of a mountain, and the moment Luffy touches the scars on Laboon's forehead, the voice of all things opens and 50 years of grief pours into his skull. Laboon is not attacking ships out of rage because he has been crying for a crew that promised to come back and never did. Luffy goes quiet in a way nobody on the Mary has ever seen. Then he paints the flag, slams his fist against the scars, and makes the promise out loud that they will come back. Laboon answers with a song that rolls through the calm belt, and for one night the Sea Kings sing back. Somewhere beneath the red line, a young mermaid princess wakes up crying and cannot explain why. And on the Mary, the crew finally understands the answer to Usopp's question because the drums were never playing through Luffy, and they have always been playing for him. Crocus watches all of it from the lighthouse because he spent 3 years as ship doctor for the last man alive who could hear the world. He looks at a rubber kid trading promises with a whale and starts laughing to himself because Roger said someone would come and Roger was right. Meanwhile, in Mariajoie, 2 reports land on the same desk and the room goes silent. 2 years ago, a certain fruit vanished from a government convoy when Red Hair's crew hit it, and now the East Blue is producing witness accounts of a rubber boy whose conqueror's Haki arrives with the sound of drums. The 5 elders read both pages without saying a word until a voice from the empty throne room says the only 2 words that matter. It's awake. So that is what happens when Luffy unlocks Joy Boy's Haki in episode 1. Shanks keeps his arm and his rivalry with Mihawk stays alive while the sun god's name gets whispered in Arlong Park decades early and the world government starts hunting a rookie before he even finds the Grand Line. Drop a comment with which arc you want this version of Luffy to hit next. Subscribe for more One Piece what ifs, and I will see you in the next one.